We are all yours.
All right. Good morning.
Woo,
Let's
look at the queen. I
a little different background today. Well, we in the Unity Center of Montreal, there's a very prayerful service that we have with daily word and candle lighting and the great invocation. And so we continue in that flow of consciousness inward in a time of prayer and meditation. I invite you to take a moment to find a comfortable position. Begin to your attention on your breathing. Our breath, we are one with all living creatures on the planet. We breathe in, we breathe out. Just as in life, we give and receive and give and receive. We act, we rest. We enter into this rhythm now and move our attention inward, withdrawing our attention from outer experience to inward experience, to contemplate the presence and reality of God. God is the absolute, infinite one, all-encompassing, all-pervading, the only presence. God is the absolute one, infinite consciousness, intelligence, wisdom. So we open ourselves to that realization that that wisdom, that consciousness and intelligence is within us. The omnipresence. And we recognize that same wisdom, intelligence, and consciousness in anyone and everyone we may think of. As our prayer is to be open to receive that higher mind. Our prayer also is that others may be open to receive the wisdom, intelligence of that higher mind. So anyone you think of today may be in need of guidance, may be in need of creative inspiration, may be in need of an expansion of consciousness. As you think of them now, know right there in the midst of them is that infinite intelligence waiting their recognition, ready to flow in and expand their consciousness as it flows in and expands our consciousness. So we hold each other, we hold ourselves in this awareness for a moment. We are open to the infinite wisdom of God. As consciousness, God is life. For it is consciousness that is the essence of our lives, our consciousness of our body and of our world is our life. So God is infinite life. This life flows in us, through us, just as our breath flows in us and through us. This life is ever present, providing energy and strength. And so now we visualize ourselves as filled with energy and strength. We form an image of ourselves as filled with energy and strength, radiant with that energy and light. We move our attention into our bodies to feel that energy, that strength, and that life that is the very presence of the Infinite One, God the Good, within us. God is harmony, and so that life is one with the harmony of God. This is the healing activity, the healing energy, the healing power within us, this energy, this harmony. We accept it. We hold others in that same awareness. We are praying for anyone this morning for healing. We see them in the light of truth. The infinite life and harmony of God are within you now. The wholeness of God is within you now. We trust that our knowing and our holding this truth is the faith that heals. And we trust that those we hold in this consciousness are ready to receive that healing. The infinite substance of the Infinite One is ever available to prosper us. So if we are seeking an increase in supply, we know others who are seeking an increase in supply, we affirm and hold for them the infinite substance of God prospers you. The infinite substance of God prospers me. The infinite substance of God prospers us. We trust this flow, the limitless good of God, to flow into our lives, ever increasingly, ever manifesting greater good. The infinite substance of God prospers us. Now we rest for a few moments in silence to receive the wisdom, the healing, prosperity, the peace of God. We are still knowing the one I am within us. Be still and know the I am God in silence. We accept our good with gratitude. We rejoice in the ever increasing consciousness of the Infinite One in our lives. And so it is. Amen. Bring our attention back to this place, to each other, to this time of sharing. My series of talks has been on some of the challenging questions of ultimate concern, kinds of questions that science does not answer. And the question I intend to address today is, if God is good and omnipotent, then why is there evil? Epicurus is reputed to be the first person to raise the classic statement of what's called the problem of evil 2,300 years ago. The way Epicurus put it was this: is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then is he malevolent? Is he both able and willing? Whence then is evil? Ever since Epicurus stated the dilemma, those who believe in an omnipotent and good God have tried to find a way through what are called the horns of that dilemma. As we will see, the possible answer is related to our power of imagination and the nature of illusion. We need to define our terms before we can address this question. What do we mean by evil? And of course, a related question is, what do we mean by good? I discussed the meaning of good in a talk I did on May 12th titled The Most Important Question. Okay. And we can still watch that talk if you want to on Unity Center Montreal YouTube. Okay. In that talk, I made a case from philosophy and mysticism that all of our judgments about good or evil can only be relatively true and relatively false. The absolute truth, and likewise the absolute good, could only be described in an infinite number of statements. No finite number of statements can be absolutely true. Therefore, we can only state relative truths and likewise make statements about relative good and relative evil. As Jesus expressed it so long ago, God alone is good. Even so, we can say a few things that are true about the absolute, I think. The absolute encompasses and pervades everything and therefore must be characterized by wholeness, unity, and harmony. The relative good then must be that which is aligned with wholeness, unity, and harmony. And therefore, we can define evil as meaning that which does not align with wholeness, unity, and harmony. We must keep in mind that when we talk about good and evil, we are thinking in relative terms. Our finite judgments about good and evil are relative rather than absolute. Our finite judgments about good and evil are relative to human experience. The wholeness, unity, and harmony of the absolute infinite one cannot be affected or disrupted by the finite actions of humans. Now, clearly, the question about evil that Epicurus raised, and so many have thought about, that question is only problematic for those who believe in an omnipotent and good God. Because if one believes in a God that is not absolute good, or is simply indifferent to human suffering, there's no dilemma to be solved, right? Evil is because God is not absolute good, or God is indifferent to human suffering. That would be the answer. And likewise, if one believes in a God who is not omnipotent, there is no problem. Okay. And there's also no dilemma to be solved if one is an atheist. So the dilemma is a matter of, in effect, what we believe. Yet even those who believe in a limited God, and even atheists, have a stake in trying to understand the causes of the relative human evil, and the causes of human suffering. And so over the ages, various answers have been proposed for this question, what the answer to this question. I'm going to share a few of those types of answers to see the difficulty of the question. Evil is one of the answers, a proposed answer is that evil is caused by evil powers. All right. So there's a cosmological dualism that was expressed originally in Zoroastrianism, and we find it also in some believers in Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. This dualism holds that there are evil powers at work in the universe that are doing battle with the good God. There are various explanations for where the evil spirits came from and why God hasn't simply destroyed them. The two powers explanation of evil contradicts the very nature of the absolute, which, as we said, as noted, is oneness. The two powers idea is inconsistent with metaphysics, it's inconsistent with mysticism, and it's even inconsistent with science. Science must presuppose a fundamental unity in nature, because otherwise science could not begin to formulate universal laws that operate everywhere all the time. There's a fundamental unity in nature. So this dualistic answer is not particularly helpful. Another proposed answer is that a certain amount of evil is necessary to produce the greatest good or greater good. This idea was notably proposed by Leibniz, who was a genius, mathematician, and philosopher. He proposed that some evil is necessary in order to produce the greatest possible good. That was the argument that he made. And so Leibniz is most famous for saying this is the best of all possible worlds. That's what he meant. This is the world that has the least amount of evil to produce the greatest amount of good. His main point was that God, being benevolent, omniscient, and omnipotent, would have considered all possible worlds before creating this one, that would produce, again, maximum good with a minimum of necessary evil. Now, the main problem with Leibniz's argument, as I see it, is his concept that God must determine everything according to logical necessity. And this deterministic theory is undermined by his conception of God as infinite. Infinity is an indeterminate and undeterminable thing. And so it makes no sense to assume that an undeterminable and indeterminate source must produce a strictly determinate universe, especially along the lines as proposed by Leibniz and others. So I addressed this issue in my September 29th talk called God's Will. Another proposed answer to the question about evil is that evil is the absence of good. Now, this approach affirms that evil has no positive being, but is merely a relative absence of good. So, according to this argument that evil is the absence of good, only God is infinite and all creatures are finite. And so creatures can have only finite goodness. For example, on this account, hate would be considered a relative absence of love, right, compared to infinite love in a finite creature. Illness would be considered a relative absence of health, and so on. Now, St. Augustine of Hippo was one who proposed this kind of argument, and so did Ralph Waldo Emerson and many other theologians in between the 4th and 19th century. Well, Socrates held a variation on the absence of good position. He contended that absence of knowledge is the cause of evil. In effect, he contended that if people knew the real nature of the good, they would not do evil. I personally think this is about right. Still, one can wonder why an omnipotent good God would create such ignorant beings capable of doing evil. Now, one other proposed answer to the question, why is there evil, is that evil is an illusion. Now, some Hindu and other religions are examples of this perspective, that evil is an illusion. In fact, the whole world is an illusion, and consequently, that's why what we call evil would also be an illusion. Now, the main problem with this argument as it's been proposed, this school of thought has no explanation for what created the illusion or what entities are experiencing the illusion. So there is a problem, because if there's an illusion, then something must be having it, and it must have come from somewhere. So the answer isn't entirely satisfactory. And finally, there is the argument that judgments about good and evil have no truth value. They are merely statements about individual preferences rather than matters of fact. Philosophers Spinoza and Hume and various modern positivist or emotivist philosophers hold this view, that judgments about good and evil, being relative to individual human preferences, do not describe reality. They're simply statements of preference rather than statements of fact or truth. So moral judgments are only relative to individual preferences, and so such judgments cannot be objectively true. This approach to the question has some appeal, but I think in the end it's simply too reductive. It doesn't really get at what it is that we want to know. The possibility of saying, yes, we can agree, this is good, this is bad, objectively. So I don't really care for the relativist, that sort of extreme relativism. Yes, ideas of good and evil can only be relatively true or false in relation to the absolute. And of course, they are relative to human experience, as Spinoza pointed out. Right? Our ideas of good and evil are relative to our experience as human beings. On the other hand, that is also the nature even of scientific theories. Scientific theories are relative to human perceptions of facts, and such theories evolve with new discoveries. Even scientists recognize that their theories are the ones that work best so far, and that these theories will probably change with more discoveries. Likewise, as I've mentioned, there is a basis for asserting that actions can be relatively more or less aligned with or against the absolute good. Our ideas of good and evil evolve over time, just as ideas of truth evolve in the context of science. I think each of these types of answers provide partial explanations. They have something to be said for them, but each is also incomplete in some ways. So I want to come at that question from one more angle, beginning with what must be true about any possible world, going back to Leibniz's notion of possible worlds. What must necessarily be true about any possible world? As a matter of logic, any possible world of forms requires boundaries. Without boundaries, there would just be a sort of static, homogeneous, formless blob, not really creation as we talk about it. There must be forms, and therefore there must be boundaries on those forms. What makes a form distinct within an environment is its boundaries. That's what makes each form distinct, its boundaries. And where there are boundaries, it is always possible for finite conscious beings to experience an illusion of separation. Now, we don't necessarily have to believe in separation. Nevertheless, that belief, that illusion, is pervasive in the world. I'd like you to think for a moment of the Taoist symbol of the yin and yang. It's got it behind me here. I'm going to slide over a little bit if you can still hear me. Right? It's the yin yang circle, the symbol of Taoism. In the in this case, I've got green, but in the light area, uh, the yang area, there is a small dark yin circle. And in the dark yin area is a small light circle. See it there? Small light circle. Now, between the two areas, there's a curved line. Okay. The line in the middle distinguishes the two areas from each other, but it also signifies a connecting place between the two. The line then indicates a distinction that can be made between the yin and yang, yet it is also a line that connects them. The small circles in each area represent the idea that the distinct elements interpenetrate each other. And I should point out right away that in Taoism, the light and the dark don't represent good and evil. They simply represent two different elements that are found in nature, and they have all kinds of meanings for it. But the point is this idea that there's a connection at the middle, and there's interpenetration in this symbol. So the interpretation of separation, and as illustrated by this, the interpretation of separation is a misinterpretation. It is an illusion, because there's distinction, but there's not separation. There's a line of connection. There's an interpenetration of these different ideas. Another way to see this is considering the nature of our human skin, which we think of as enclosing what we are, or we may think of that in that way, that which separates us from the rest of the world. But the human skin is actually a boundary. It's a boundary that distinguishes our bodies from the surrounding environment. However, our skin is also the area of contact and interconnection with the environment. Light, heat, air, water, particles, and waves of nature move in and out of our bodies. We are interconnected with that. Our good, the air, water, sustenance of nature, our good is, of course, connected to the good of all others. We share the same ecology, the same good. So when we interpret ourselves as separate, we're falling into this illusion of separation because of the distinctions that must be made in terms of a world that includes forms. Now, so we can ask the question, how can moral judgments be only relatively true and relatively false? Consider, for example, the judgment that murder is evil. Most people would agree that murder is evil. But suppose we say it's only relatively evil, that it's only 99.999% evil or something like that. And so then we would ask, well, what could possibly be the relatively minuscule good of murder? Well, people recognizing people, recognizing that murder is bad, do what they can to avoid and prevent murder. So avoiding and preventing murder is, relatively good. Recognizing murder as bad, people try to bring murderers to justice. Bringing murderers to justice is also good to the degree that justice itself is good. So even in the worst things that we can think of, there can be this tiny little bit of good interpenetrating it. And in any case, whatever it is cannot be separated from the absolute oneness of the universe. What we regard as opposites or dualities are mutually and reciprocally defining. This is kind of a main point that we find in the Tao Te Ching, right? Without the concept of the beautiful, there is no concept of the ugly, and vice versa. We make the distinction. The good of overcoming, for example. We talk about overcoming things is good. Well, that requires the relative evil of adversity. You can't have overcoming without adversity. The good of heroism sometimes, not always, but sometimes requires the relative evil of a villain. And so we see that these things are mutually, reciprocally defining. They're not separate, they're somehow related to each other. Now, it may offend some to talk about moral judgments in terms of relative degrees of certainty. It may feel somehow unsatisfying to act as if we are certain purely as a practical matter. But again, I go back to science. That is exactly the situation with what we call scientific theories. Based on the history of science, we have every reason to believe that current scientific theories will change in the future based on new evidence. Nevertheless, scientists must act as if their theories are now true until evidence requires reevaluations. Scientists know that their theories may not be absolutely accurate, that the theories may require alteration and even total replacement in the future. But as long as currently accepted theories work better than any known alternatives, scientists must trust that the theories are reliable enough to act as if they were true for practical purposes. This is our same situation with our ideas about good and bad. We must act as if our judgments are true for practical purposes until we evolve to a higher state of consciousness. We ourselves, as individuals and collectively, we create the illusion of separation with our power of imagination. We do this all the time. We can imagine that we are separate from each other. Yet, here you are within my consciousness, and here I am within your consciousness. We sort of are within each other, if you will. We could just as easily imagine that we are one, that we are interconnected, that we are one with the wholeness, harmony, and unity of the Absolute. Imagining oneness is very near realizing absolute truth and absolute good. Imagining oneness can help dissolve the illusion of separation. With all due respect to the Apostle Paul, money is not the root of all kinds of evil, or the root of all evil, as people sometimes put it. The root of all evil is this illusion of separation. It's because people imagine that their good is separate from the good of others that greed causes the evils referred to by Paul. So this love of money, this greed, is really just part of, or one of the elements of, that that flow from the illusion of separation that we imagine, right? People battle, persecute, abuse, kill, steal, and otherwise harm each other because people imagine our existence and our good is separate from the existence and good of others. And again, this is an imagined state of affairs. It's an illusion. Dissolving the illusion of separation requires spreading a consciousness of unity. It requires the realization that the self interest of each of us is connected to the self interests of all. It requires developing a consciousness of inclusion, right? Unity, consciousness of inclusion, and a respect for diversity, the diversity that gives variety within the nature of the universe. Now, if all people adopted the mystic paradigm, this consciousness of oneness, regardless of their political and religious preferences, that consciousness of unity would decrease harmful human behavior and increase helpful human behavior. There is no persecution, there is no animosity in the mystical consciousness, there is no separation in the mystical consciousness. So you can see that imagination can cause problems, right? Such as the illusion of separation, which I argue is sort of the fundamental illusion that we tend to get sucked into, if you will. And I have to add that our imaginations can also be powerfully beneficial. It's sort of the idea of using your powers in the right way, right? I spoke about beneficial uses of imagination in my talks in August. We can use imagination to manifest beneficial creative possibilities. This is our participation in the co-creation of our world. We can use imagination to express beauty in art, in music. We can use imagination to generate health as well as art. We can use imagination to generate inventions. We can use our imagination to manifest wealth, to develop athletic skills and other abilities. Imagination may not be sufficient to create the experiences we desire, but it is necessary for manifesting possibilities. So imagination is a necessary power in the process of creation, even though at times it may lead us into various kinds of illusions, such as the illusion of separation. Imagining oneness is another beneficial use of imagination, perhaps the most beneficial use. We can use it to develop this consciousness of oneness, to illustrate, for example, the principle of unity. We can use our imagination to help dissolve the illusion of separation. Instead of imagining the world and other people as apart from you, outside of you, you can imagine that they're inside your consciousness, a part of you, right now in this moment. You can imagine that everyone on the screen and everyone in the room in Montreal, in the city of Montreal, and the whole continent of America, the whole globe, that all of that is inside your consciousness, that it's not apart from you, but a part of you. And if we imagine things in that way, if you go out on a walk and instead of thinking of, oh, the trees are beautiful, those outside trees are beautiful, or the flowers are beautiful, imagine, oh, those are in my consciousness. I am one of them. They are part of what I am. When we do that, we are close to a realization of the absolute truth of oneness. When we dissolve any degree of the illusion of separation, we dissolve to the same degree problems caused by that illusion. By imagining oneness instead of separation, we can solve and dissolve the so-called problem of evil. By imagining oneness instead of separation, we come closer to realizing the absolute truth and the absolute good of God. That is a mystic consciousness. Thank you, friends.